Je souhaiterais maintenant donner la parole à Monsieur Djwala Rambaran, gouverneur de la Banque centrale de Trinidad et Tobago. Monsieur le gouverneur, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Chair. In August 2015, Tropical Storm Erica killed over 30 persons in the Caribbean island of Dominica, destroying hundreds of homes, bridges, and roads. Damages, losses, and reconstruction costs are estimated at around half of GDP. According to the country's Prime Minister, Dominica's economic development has been set back by 20 years. For us in the Caribbean, climate change is not some distant possibility. It is a serious and escalating threat. Although we contribute less than 1% to global greenhouse gas emissions, we are among the most vulnerable to climate change and least able to cope. Natural disasters such as Tropical Storm Erica are becoming more frequent and intense in the Caribbean. However, high debt burdens are not only severely compromising our capacity to invest meaningfully in the fight against climate change, but more importantly, could jeopardize our attainment of the recently agreed Sustainable Development Goals. As a rule of thumb, the IMF suggests that public debt to GDP ratios between 50 to 75% signal heightened debt vulnerabilities. At the end of 2014, 3 Caribbean countries had public debt between 50 to 75% of GDP, and 5 countries had public debt ratios between 76 to 99% of GDP. Another 3 Caribbean countries had public debt in excess of 100% of GDP. In 2014, the public debt of Jamaica registered over 135% of GDP, one of the highest in the world. In the wake of a natural disaster, our Caribbean governments immediately increased public spending, funding these unplanned expenditures directly from the budget until they receive overseas aid, which usually takes a longer than expected time to be delivered. As a result, natural disasters place our Caribbean government's public finances under even greater pressure and worsen their public debt burdens. Even though Caribbean countries have engaged in various sovereign debt restructuring episodes, this approach has not yielded durable gains, sometimes leading to repeated restructuring. Since the start of the 2000s, 7 Caribbean countries have restructured their sovereign debt, including 4 countries which restructured their bilateral debt with the Paris Club. And I understand only yesterday, Grenada came to the Paris Club for its bilateral debt restructuring. We are all aware how disruptive and costly a debt restructuring is to a country's perceived creditworthiness. It is simply not desirable to repeat one. Yet, one Caribbean country restructured its sovereign debt a record 4 times in 2006 to 2015, and 3 Caribbean countries twice restructured their sovereign debt in the past decade. We in the Caribbean have been forced to go the route of restructuring debt since we are not eligible to benefit from multilateral debt relief initiatives such as the HIPC initiative. This is because the international community believes that, apart from Guyana and Haiti, other Caribbean countries are either not poor enough and/or not severely indebted enough. According to the World Bank's income classification, which is based on the GDP per capita criteria, most Caribbean countries are considered upper middle and high income countries. As a result, we are not eligible for concessional lending or debt relief from the international financial institutions. This is despite the fact that GDP per capita is a poor measure of the extreme susceptibility of Caribbean countries to external shocks and to climate change. To make matters worse, it is very difficult for us in the Caribbean to simply grow out of high debt. Caribbean countries are projected to grow slower than other developing countries over the next few years. The IMF forecasts the Caribbean region to grow at around 2.5% in 2016 to 2020, less than half the growth rate of emerging markets and developing countries. Since growth is likely to be weak, the extraordinarily high and continuous fiscal adjustment required for Caribbean countries to achieve public debt sustainability is neither economically feasible nor politically desirable. I'm aware this is a sensitive issue for IMF and World Bank staff, grappling to find cogent and plausible policy responses to breaking the low-growth, high-debt trap in the Caribbean. The third International Conference on Financing for Development held in Addis Ababa called for a durable solution to the debt problems of developing countries. Building on the spirit of Addis Ababa, I would like to suggest a 5-point plan of action for the Paris Forum to move the forum process itself from a relatively passive dialogue to an active initiator of practical innovation in sovereign debt restructuring. Some elements of an illustrative 5-point action plan could be: 1, for the Paris Forum and debtor countries to devise a formal work program to examine and explore the growing array of innovative debt restructuring mechanisms in use or being contemplated. For example, the United Nations and the Commonwealth Secretariat are jointly advocating a multilateral debt relief for climate swap initiative. The proposal seeks to provide developing countries with significant debt relief while helping them unlock pledged climate financing. The Paris Forum could consider how this and other innovative instruments can be more formally integrated with traditional debt restructuring mechanisms, and how these innovations can be more widely used and usage scaled up. Secondly, the Paris Forum should consider devising and proposing new rules to address the problems faced by developing countries with repeated sovereign debt rescheduling episodes. The need to continuously return to the table is as much a signal of failure by creditors as it is one of failure by the debtor country itself. The Caribbean experience seems to make a feasible case for a formalized process to prevent repeated sovereign debt restructuring events. Third, the Paris Forum should consider developing and announcing new partnerships with global institutions like the United Nations, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the G24 to address the policy challenges associated with unsustainable level of indebtedness. The UN's guidelines on sovereign debt restructuring offer a practical set of principles and steps for restructuring and deserve broader and more concerted international attention. They also include several principles that are particularly relevant for small states. Fourth, the Paris Club should consider undertaking a closer examination of the linkages between unsustainable debt and achievement of the new SDGs. Indeed, there is a compelling case for the international community to include the structural vulnerabilities of developing countries amongst the criteria for accessing concessional resources and official development finance. As the IMF and World Bank continue to base eligibility for access to concessional resources on income thresholds, many middle-income developing countries, such as those in the Caribbean, continue to be excluded from IDA and PRGT resources. Ironically, both the fund and bank have included a vulnerability criteria to prevent premature graduation from IDA and PRGT facilities, but they have not found it appropriate to use vulnerabilities as a criteria to determine eligibility to use these very same concessional resources. And the fifth point is for the Paris Forum to consider initiating a closer and more frequent process of dialogue, complemented by a proposed new annual meeting held in a developing country, focused on practical challenges in catalyzing innovative financing for debt restructuring. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago will be pleased to host such an inaugural dialogue. In closing, I sincerely thank both the Turkish presidency of the G20 and the Paris Club for the kind invitation to participate in this third edition of the Paris Forum, Focus on Debt and Development. I commend them for broadening the participation of emerging and developing countries in the forum, especially the Caribbean, which requires a stronger voice and more influential role in debt and international development. Thank you.
Already this morning, we've seen how interesting a debate and discussion you can have when you have a really diverse group of countries discussing these very topical and interesting issues. I think the points that we heard from Trinidad and Tobago about the importance of domestic resource mobilization are incredibly important. And as our US colleague said, the international community is committed to doing what we can to try and help developing countries in that area. And I also think that we can welcome a lot of the work that has been done around the issue of debt relief, particularly the HIPC initiative, which undoubtedly has made huge progress and provided real benefits to a large number of developing countries. Nonetheless, I do hear the points that we've heard from Trinidad and Tobago about the fact that this, for the countries, that it helps, it's a great help, but there are countries who are not eligible for it, who are also facing very real problems. And I thought the link that he made to the issues around climate change were interesting and particularly pertinent. In that context, I thought his proposal to ask the Paris Forum to look specifically at introducing formal processes to help prevent repeated debt restructuring events was an interesting one, and is one that certainly we would be keen to work with the Paris Club in considering how we can take that forward. There's been, over the last year, a huge amount of discussion about how we shift the debate to debt sustainability and to avoiding debt accumulation at a country level. Undoubtedly, I support the comments that have already been made about the responsibilities of individual countries in this area. But nonetheless, as an international community, we need to provide an enabling environment, and we need to do what we can to help support countries. I think when there is so much discussion and so many different initiatives going on, you can risk getting into a situation where you have multiple parallel processes. And in that context, I would like to be very clear that the UK regards the IMF World Bank debt sustainability framework as really being the key tool for debt sustainability analysis. And I understand that the tool is going to be reviewed at the beginning of 2016, and we very much support that review and hope that we can work together to improve the coverage and accuracy of the debt distress analysis under that tool. And I hope that as a community we can agree that is the key mechanism that should be used on a country basis, but also in multilateral contexts. I think those are the key points I wanted to make, but just to reiterate the fact that addressing the issue of debt sustainability and avoiding repeated debt accumulation at a country level is absolutely key.
Let me finally congratulate the Paris Club for the debt restructuring negotiated yesterday with Grenada, which included one of those innovative mechanisms, which was the hurricane clause, to deal with the problem that the central bank governor from Trinidad and Tobago was talking about how do you deal with natural disasters and their undue burden on economies. So that is at least one response that's extremely positive.